Let me turn the sound up on the...
No. No.
Yo, what up, Dorki here?
No. Jesus Christ.
Today I want to give you guys my advanced guide on Vengeance Demon Hunter for 10.1. This will mostly cover questions that I get a lot on stream about Vengeance. So starting off with stats, your first and foremost stat will be haste. You want as much haste as possible. Outside of haste, you can go for crit and versatility. Crit's been very popular recently because of how much melee damage there is in Season 2 dungeons, and being able to parry is actually going to mitigate much more physical damage than almost any other stat. So in short, just go for as much haste as possible, and then secondary can be crit or versatility. Not that big of a deal. As for trinkets, beacon and chromatic essence from raid will be your best trinkets. Aside from this, you can go for the dice from freehold. You can go for ward of faceless ire, gives both yourself a really good shield, or you can use it on your teammates in a scary fight. The black dragon scale from the first boss is also very good. And aside from this, there's the talisman of crag shaper from Neltharian's lair and the splinter from Brackenhide. If I was going for strictly M+ trinkets, I'd probably go with splinter plus dice, or you can go with double on use and talisman plus splinter. Alright, now let's talk about the talent builds. There's two primary builds, this one which revolves around Frailty and Soul Crush, then there's the Now Pog build, which revolves around Feed the Demon and Last Resort. So we'll talk about the Frailty build first. In this build you have a couple of different options. We have 2 points in Extended Spikes, but you could take this out for 2 points in Agonizing and Burning Blood, which will give you a little bit more damage, but you lose a good bit of spikes uptime. Down here, Soulmonger or Focus Cleave, it doesn't matter too much. Focus Cleave is more damage, Soulmonger is a tiny bit extra tankiness, it's up to you. And down here, Elsing Decree and Fodder to the Flame is also preference, it's a very minor difference. As for the Now Pog build, this build you can drop 1 point in Void Reaver for Agonizing Flame for a little bit extra longer immolation, which will also help with extending your fiery brands. And let's compare the two builds real quick. So with the Frailty build, you will for the most part be tankier because of Frailty. You can apply multiple applications of Frailty with Soul Crush, which means you are leeching more from this talent right here, and you are taking less damage from Void Reaver here. You can sit anywhere between 2 to 10 stacks of Frailty depending on what you're hitting, meaning you're taking anywhere from 8 all the way up to 40% less damage compared to not having Soul Crush at all. This also means you're doing a lot more damage with vulnerability. However, the big reason why this build has been popping up is primarily because of Feed the Demon. Feed the Demon means that you have more consistent tankiness. You're not going to be tankier at all times with this build compared to the regular Frailty build. However, you will have much less windows of squishiness. You can pretty much have spikes permanently with this build. And on top of that, you have Last Resort, which is a really big cheat def. Having a cheat def means you have a safety net, and mistakes happen in M+ all the time, even at the very highest level. Even the best players in the world make a ton of mistakes. And by having this talent, it prevents a potential wipe, because unlike a DPS dying, a tank dying is catastrophically bad. So I don't care what the Demon Hunter Discord tells you, or whatever Demon Hunter player tells you, Last Resort is insane and it's one of the best cheat defs because it gives you a metamorphosis. I know there's an argument saying that like, oh, it's 8-minute CD compared to like Purgatory for example, but you're not going to be cheating death on cooldown. It's there for those keys where you might die like 1 or 2 times throughout the dungeon, and this would actually prevent that 1 or 2 deaths from occurring. So as for recommendation, I've mostly been playing the Frailty build, to be honest. I find it more engaging and fun, but both builds work. You can choose whichever one you feel like playing. This one's a little bit safer, and this one is overall better. So are Crawgtusk worth using, and should you go for them? They are best for single target. So when you're doing a single target mob or a boss encounter, you will want to use Crawgtusk. However, in AoE or if you're doing trash, the stats you get from having actual weapons are much better. So I swap between the two sets in keys. I will link a script you can run down below in the comments that you can use to create these two macros for equipping your gear sets. Here's another common question. When do you use Soul Cleave versus Spirit Bomb? You will always prioritize Spirit Bombing over Soul Cleave if you have souls. However, once you exhaust all your soul generators and souls, you will want to spend the rest of your fury on Soul Cleaving. So your primary generators are Fracture, Immolation Aura, and Soul Carver. When all of these are on cooldown, you will want to spend the rest of your fury on soul cleaves. So for example, it could be something as simple as Fracture, Spirit Bomb, and then spend the rest on soul cleave. Or something like Fracture, Immolation Aura, Spirit Bomb, Fracture, Soul Carver, Spirit Bomb, Fracture again, and then Spirit Bomb, and then spend the rest on soul cleaves. It just depends on what soul generators you have available or how much souls you have. Using Soul Cleave is not as important in the now Pog build, but in the Frailty build, it matters a lot more because each Soul Cleave is generating a Frailty stack, and if you're playing Focused Cleave, your Soul Cleaves are doing much more damage. Alright, let's talk about how the 4 set works real quick and the interactions with all the brand talents. So here I have this weak ward to track how many souls left until I get a 4 set proc. You can find all this stuff in my UI down in the description below. Alright, so let's get a proc real quick. 4 souls. Now, if we fracture this mob, it'll apply a 6-second brand. But each brand that jumps is actually a 10-second brand. You can also apply your 4 set proc onto an existing brand. So I'll show you here in a second. Okay, now if we apply this, if we actually manually brand here and we use our proc onto one of these, let's use it on this one right here. It'll extend it by another 6 seconds. And when you extend a brand, that brand can spread its brand onto other targets. As you can see here. Ideally, you are using your 4 set brand on the longest existing brand that you have up. By doing this, that means you will have a brand that can spread for longer. So if I were to apply my brand onto like this one right here, a fresh 10-second brand, or this one that jumps, you will have a brand that can spread for longer. It spreads for every 2 seconds, so a 15-second brand could spread up to 7 times, meaning that you should always prioritize whatever is the longest available. Now let's talk about understanding Vengeance Inventor Tankiness. So the obvious ones are Demon Spikes and Meta. They are your primary mitigation, but the less obvious ones are Painbringer stacks, Fiery Brand spreading, and Frailty. If you go into a pull with just spikes up, you're going to be extremely squishy, meaning you will always want to have something on top of spikes on pull. And once you get rolling, that's when you become tanky. Take a look at this clip for example. I start the pull by just tagging mobs from afar, put up a fiery brand before they even reach me so that I can start spreading wet right away. Go up to the mobs, hit them real quick and walk away. Make sure I'm not just taking all these melees head on, because with just spikes up, I will very likely just die. So as they're grouping up, I'm generating souls, Spirit Bomb as I'm going in, Meta, a big defensive once they're grouped up. I could also be using Sack from my healer, or Beldev, or a tank trinket like Splinter. And once the pull gets going, you should be pretty tanky. As you can see here, I have 12 stacks of Painbringer. I've got 2 or so stacks of Frailty on all the mobs, and I'm passively just much tankier than I was before, and my brands are slowly starting to spread. Let's take a look at an example that is what I should not be doing. So in this pull, I go into the pull, brand a mob, spikes, and just this is not enough. The melees instantly proc my cheat. I was not expecting this at all, and I should have definitely just taken this much slower. We'll take a look at one more example. So this right here, generate a soul as I'm going in with a fracture, tag the mobs from far away, put up a brand from far away, spikes, then walk away as I'm generating souls. I'm tagging the mobs with Immolation Aura, brands are starting to spread, put up a Fiery Sigil, and by the time they're grouping on me, I have a decent bit of aggro because of the Spirit Bombs I've been putting out. I have some stacks of Painbringer going, brands are starting to spread, I've got a couple stacks of Frailty going, and we have mobs coming in late. so I'm not just fighting one cluster of mobs at a time. With Demon Hunter, you have consistent tankiness or persistent tankiness rather than burst tankiness. It's not like Pro Paladin or Pro Warrior where you go into a pull, you've got Sentinel or your shield blocks up. You need to actually build up your tankiness. So as a Demon Hunter, you always want to have slower pulls, chain pulls, get your brands going, get your souls going, and just like attack mobs as you group. Here's one more example of how you should be starting up a pull. So I tag this War Scourge from far away. I put up my brand and I'm just fracturing it as I go into the pack. And by the time we start the pack, I have a good bit of souls up, 6 stacks of Painbringer, a couple stacks of Frailty. Brand is spreading. My brand might have been a little bit too early on this War Scourge, but it's fine. Because with my 4 set, I'm spreading all the brands. And by the time everything is grouped up, I am mostly stable and I'm not taking much damage at all. Alright, that is it for the video guide. Hopefully that'll cover most of the questions you guys had. As long as you apply these concepts to the keys you are doing, you should get pretty far. With that said, thank you all very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you guys have any more Demon Hunter questions, and I will see you guys in the next stream or video.